Good evening, everyone, and thank you for making time to join us. It's quite interesting to have very thoughtful, I think, mix of senior professionals from the publishing world, people who've been involved as strategists, founders, builders as well. The idea this evening is not to run a very tightly moderated conversation. It is to create a space for a more open and, if you like, a searching conversation on how AI is reshaping publishing, both in terms of business models and deeper questions of value, ownership, and distribution. Before we begin, just a couple of quick notes to help the flow. We'll keep this fairly relaxed, more of a adda, if you like, than a formal session. As thoughts or questions occur to you, do drop them in the chat. That helps us keep track and sequence them. At the right moments, we'll invite you to unmute and ask your question directly so that we can keep this interactive and anchored in the room. And I think we have enough time to do this without rushing. So please feel free to engage. A quick heads up, we are recording this session. We may edit and share parts of it later as a Founding Fuel podcast. So do keep that in mind as you participate. Let me just take a minute to set a bit of context for why we thought this conversation might be useful now. Over the past year, the conversation around AI and publishing has moved quite quickly, from early excitement around generative tools to more structured questions around traffic flows, attribution, monetization, and the role of platforms. And for many in this room, these are not abstract questions. They're beginning to shape real decisions around content strategy, distribution, partnerships, if you like, and even what it means to build a sustainable publishing business in this environment. What we've been particularly keen to do is to move beyond the surface level debate and instead understand how someone building at the frontier is thinking about these shifts. And with this, let me bring in Toshit. Toshit is joining us from San Francisco. Originally, he was supposed to join us from the East Coast. So this is very early for him. I think thanks so much, Toshit, for joining. And a very warm welcome to this conversation. Toshit, perhaps a good place to start would be to step back a little and share how you're seeing this moment. Because what are the structural shifts you think people in publishing are still underestimating? And how should we be thinking about where value is likely to accrue over the next few years? Over to you, Toshit. I'm not going to do a long introduction because I'm guessing everyone here has read the pre-read and know a little bit about the work that you already do and your journey, but feel free to spend maybe a few half a minute on yourself and Tolbit.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Mr. Gupta, and also thank you everyone for making the time this evening. It's going to be interesting as the sun is setting for you over there. You're probably going to see a nice sunrise over here as well during the course of this. But very nice to meet you all. And again, thank you for organizing this, Mr. Gupta. I'm also joined actually by one of my colleagues in India, Mr. Harsha Subramaniam as well. Harsha, I saw you on the call. Real quick background for context, and then we're actually, I think, Mr. Gupta, you're right. We're gonna
Please
I think
call
there's some
me IG or Indrajit. Mr. Gupta.
Indrajit. Okay.
Too formal.
Amazing. So Tolbit's a platform we like to say we help publishers monitor, manage, and monetize AI bot traffic. Now, to really understand what that means, right? Imagine, if you look at the sort of trends the last 18 months and then look forward out another 18 months, right? We started the company, say, a little over 2 years ago, and we were the first company to go to every single publisher in New York. And we told them, hey, you're focused, think about this. This is late 2023. Everyone was fixated on suing OpenAI for training on their content, right? The New York Times lawsuit, or getting a deal with OpenAI, like Axel Springer did, right? With OpenAI for training, we were the first company to go out to everyone and say, you're thinking about training today, but that's not where the revenue is going to be. Training is a one-time check. They will train on your content once and move on. In fact, they've already trained on your content. They don't need it again. We need to figure out how to make a sustainable revenue stream for you, because in the future, AI is such a foundational shift. People may not click into your website anymore. This is not the same as Google. This is not the same as social. This is not the same as mobile, right? This is a foundational shift where, it used to be the case that, in some form, people would still click in to get to read the article and read. Once you got the person to land on the page, you have n number of different ways to monetize that human attention, right? You have ads, you have affiliate links, you have subscriptions and paywalls, right? But when it comes to you have sponsored content, but when you have AI bots that come in, scrape the content, answer a user's question, that does not drive a click through. In fact, the person got their answer, right? Why would they click through at all? It's a very personalized answer. And I think we were sort of the first to also scare them a little. We said there's going to be the zero-click world where people will not come to your site. And if people don't come to your site, how do you monetize, right? And guess what? Training is not going to fix it, right? Because there's only a few AI companies that are training these models, right? You have Meta, you have Anthropic, you have OpenAI, you have Google, and then you run out of that list very quickly, right? You don't want your fates to rely on 4 companies, right? Or 5 companies. Instead, you should think about this growing trend called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Different companies call it different things, inference, grounding, but it's the idea that when the model answers a question, it has to reference a whole bunch of citations, primary source documents, links in order to ground its answer. Otherwise, it hallucinates, it lies. And what we were basically able to show is that if you were able to charge a toll to all of these visitors every time they needed to use your content, every time they needed to scrape it, well, you could actually build a sustainable business, right? And I think to sort of wrap that up, where Tolbit was unique, right, in all of this was, and I think this is a very important piece to understand because it reframes the problem a little bit, right? Everyone thought about this as a training problem. Everyone thought about this as a copyright problem, a licensing problem. We came at it from a slightly different angle. We said, yes, it's all of those things, but what if this is actually an audience problem? What if the way to look at this is that there's a new visitor emerging on the internet? It's not a human visitor, right? It's an AI visitor, an autonomous visitor. Every year, the word that's used to describe it will change, right? It's going to be a bot. It's going to be an AI agent. It's going to be an AI application, right? Or it's going to be a personal assistant. This year, right, is the year of personal assistants. But the idea is the same. It's not a human. And in the future, this might be the majority of internet traffic because these bots, they don't get tired, right? Humans, we have a limit on how much we can read, right? I think there's an estimate that every day we consume 150 to 200 billion page views on the internet. Bots will far surpass that because they don't get tired. They will read 30 articles to answer your question. So that might be over 1 trillion page views a day. So you should think about this as replacement economics in a growing market where the future consumers of the internet are not human, but bots. So I'll stop there real quick, Inderjeet, if you have any questions, but then otherwise we can dive in for the outlook for the next 18 months.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead and let's hear that, because that'll, I think, throw up more provocative questions, I'm sure.
Amazing. So in the past, right, one of the things that we had been warning about, which I think are coming true now and are going to be dangerous trends moving into the future as well, is I think in 2024 was the year of AI applications. 2025 was the year of AI agents. And I think the industry, at least here in the US and even in Europe, has come to the point that I think there's general consensus that monetizing for RAG, for inference, is the future, right? There are way more companies that built at the application layer. AI agents these AI bots are going to be far more numerous on the web than humans, and we need to have a way to have an exchange of value. Now, one of the things that we had warned about was that because when we go to publishers, the first thing they say is their IT team will come to us and say, we'll block the bots, right? We have cybersecurity solutions, we have Akamai, we have Datadome, we have Fingerprint, we will go block the bots. And we said, okay, well, that's fine, right? But think about the incentives you create. If you simply block the bots, all you're doing is you're teaching them to get better at bypassing the blocks, right? And what's going to happen is it's going to come to a point, right, where you're going to be met with a perfect storm of two things. The first is rising infrastructure costs because you're going to keep paying more and more for cybersecurity, right? You pay more, the bots get better, and then you have to pay more to upgrade your cybersecurity tools or switch vendors, right? And the second thing that's going to happen is if that keeps continuing, advertisers, especially the programmatic advertisers, will start asking questions because they're going to now say, actually certify that these are human impressions. Because we all know that your referrals are going down. People are not clicking from AI applications or Google search, right? And yet you're showing me that the impressions are remaining constant, right? How do you actually know that this is a human? Because the more you incentivize the bots to behave human-like, the less certain you become that it's actually a human who's looking at the ads. So now, if you're met with rising infrastructure costs, declining traffic because people are not clicking through, and now your advertisers are also questioning whether these programmatic impressions are real or not, right? Then the publishing industry is in for a little bit of a hard time. Oh, is it in for a hard time? There's no way of sugarcoating it. And we started actually warning for the US publishers about this in 2024, right? And we said that the only way out of this, right, is you need to have a Spotify-like model. You need to have a way, say, fine, you can block them, but what do you expect them to do? Because none of these AI developers are going to call you and spend 3 months, 6 months negotiating a deal with you, right? They'll just continue to scrape you. So you need to make it, this partnerships process, this process of licensing your content, giving access to your library. It can't take months, right? In fact, it can't even take days. You have to bring it down to a machine speed. It has to be fully programmatic, right? There has to be a fully programmatic way to license that content where a bot lands and decides based on a few vectors of value, which we're already seeing start to emerge, how much it wants to pay. And we're still figuring out, is this an auction-based model? Does the publisher set a clearing price? All of that, will be, it's still early days of that market, right? But I think publishers now are realizing they spent, Q3 and Q4 investing heavily in the US in cybersecurity tools, right? They've upgraded their cybersecurity tools or they have invested in switching their CDN provider. And we actually create, it used to be every quarter, now every half year, we publish a report called the TollBit State of the Bots, right? Where we actually track some of these trends for the publishing industry, right? One of the things that we did for this past State of the Bots report was we created a tool on the platform called the Scraper Audit, right? Where we actually, we did two things. We went out and we documented 40 different companies that AI companies use to scrape content, right? Some of these names, maybe two or three of these names you will have heard of. You might have heard of Bright Data. You might have heard of SERP API that scrapes Google API, right? But we went out and we documented actually 40 other companies that provide those services. We documented their prices. We documented their features. We documented even who their customers are based on the logos and the case studies on their site. And one of the things I think, two things came out of this for the industry, at least here in the US. It started two different conversations now. One, if you look at the customers of these companies, they're not just AI companies. McDonald's is on that list. Zillow is on that list. NVIDIA is on that list, right? Deloitte is on that list, right? Because every company now is turning into an AI company. Every company is building AI applications internally. Every single one of those companies is going out sending agents to go scrape the internet. That's why there's this whole booming industry, right, of people who are willing to provide these web scraping services, which is increasingly getting commoditized, right? The second thing it showed is just how much of the wrong incentive cybersecurity creates in the long run. because with our scraper audit tool, they can put in any URL. They can put in their own URL. They can put in a paywalled URL. And we actually made accounts at 20 different companies, 20 of these companies. And you can actually run an audit against that URL, and you can see how many of those scrapers can actually access that URL. And I think it's surprising for a lot of publishers when they realize that despite their investments in cybersecurity, most of them can usually access that URL. It takes between 4 and 64 seconds. Sometimes you have to retry it. But they are generally, non-paywalled articles are the fastest to get scraped. And even paywalled articles, if it's a client-side paywall, it does get scraped. The only people who are safe are the ones with a really strict, what do you call it? No soft paywall strategy, and it has to be a hard server-side paywall. No content can actually even come onto the browser first, right? Only then can the content never be seen by the scraper. Anything short of that, it will get scraped, right? And I think that caused a lot of conversation because I think a lot of publishers here in the US and even EU are now realizing that we have to move on beyond the cybersecurity game, right? It's almost an inevitability that the content gets scraped. What do you do now, right? So I'll stop there, but I think that's sort of the outlook and where the industry has come to.
So that's a very interesting moment, because what I hear you saying is that you've quickly reached a situation where publishers have understood that this cat and mouse game ain't working, that you've got to really double down and understand the moment and understand it well so that you can respond to it without blocking, right? Because AI traffic, based on the state of the bots report that Tolbit has put out, is galloping. Maybe you might want to just set some context for people on this call who may not have read the report, because it is alarming at one level to see the pace of growth.
Yeah. There was so for context about how we how we put out the state of the bots report. So one of our products that we offered, so remember when I said that Tolbit helps monitor, manage, and monetize, right? The one of the first products we put out, and we needed to actually, right, was a tool called Tolbit Analytics, right? And Tolbit Analytics, we call it the Google Analytics of AI traffic. The same way you have Google Analytics to understand your human visitors, Tolbit Analytics helps you understand your AI visitors. Now, to do that, we have to get integrated on the server side, right? Because most bots don't trigger JavaScript. So most JavaScript on page, analytics solutions will not capture this traffic, right? So we integrate at the server side. This allows us to understand both the AI traffic, other bot traffic, and the human traffic, and what is the relationship between the two. Does one go down? Does the other increase? At what rate does it increase, for example? And we collect these analytics from some of the world's biggest publishers now. I think the Tolbit platform encompasses over 7,000 publishers, I think last I saw. So we get a lot of data about what is happening to human traffic and bot traffic across the industry and across a lot of different regions. In order to help this industry along, this is where the state of the bots came to be, right? So I think we're in our fourth issue of the state of the bots report, I believe. And what we do is to come up with the insights there, we actually aggregate and anonymize the data that we see across the Tolbit network, right? So the data that a publisher might see on the Tolbit dashboard, we aggregate it across the entire network, anonymize it, and then share the things that the industry needs to pay attention to for that quarter or for the next 2 quarters. So, Indrajit, one of the things you said was, the industry has, I think, quickly come to this conclusion. I would say it has taken a while. It has taken the better part of 2 years for I think publishers in the US to actually get to this point, right? It took 7-8 months to even understand. It took until 2024, end of 2024. Even in 2024, until the end of it, people were questioning whether monetizing per RAG was the correct future here, right? And I think in 2025, everyone accepted that. And only now are they coming to terms with, then they said, well, we're going to try to block the bots. That's what they did in the second half of 2025. Now they're coming around to wait, no matter how much we block, they will always get through. And it's tilted against the publishers, actually, right? Because they are the ones who have to spend the money to secure the content. It only requires a few scrapers to get through to access that content, unfortunately, right? Now, with that, it is one of the things that we see across Tolbit Analytics is, or sorry, that we highlight in the State of the Bots report is, I'll give you two insights. One is going to be maybe obvious. The second is going to be non-obvious. The first one which is obvious is the fastest growing segment of traffic on the internet is RAG agents, by and large. I think when we started publishing the State of the Bots report, it was something like, don't quote me on this, the exact number is going to be in there. It was, but the best of my memory, one in maybe 200 bots,
200.
or sorry, yeah, one in every 200 visitors to a site was an AI bot. That number has now become 1 in 33. It is the fastest growing segment of bot across the internet, or visitor period across the internet. So it shows how quickly AI traffic rises, right? Now, why is that, right? And it isn't until I think it took, and this is another sort of interject to your point, like when did publishers actually come to realize this? And I think it took until 2025. When you ask a question on an AI platform, right? Think about how different that is from Google. When I would ask a question on Google, you get 10 blue links. And what do? We click the first link, we click the second link, and then we might get bored and we move on, or we do another Google search, right? When you ask a question on AI platform, it doesn't just look at the first 2 links. It will read all 10 links. It will read 30 links if it has to. It will read through a 100-page PDF if it has to answer your question. And it'll do it very quickly, right? In a matter of a couple hundreds of a millisecond, right? That's why the bot traffic grows, right? Because when you ask that question, there's almost this over-leveraged effect. Well, your one question, force them to go read 10, 20 articles to answer your question, 14 articles to answer your question. That's why that bot traffic keeps growing so quickly, right? Because every time, and this is different from Google search, right? It is different, say, from Google bot having to go out and index the web. Because when you index the web, you don't have to store the full article either, right? Why do these bots need to keep fetching this content, right? Google, even at their scale, has not stored all of the documents on the web. They store pointers to the documents, right? So that they can tell you which links answer your question. It's different with AI because the way an LLM works, when you answer a question, you have to actually load the context, right? So you actually have to load the full text of the articles into the context in order to answer the question better. This is why even after the model does the search and it finds what 10 articles it needs to cite, it then goes and fetches the articles, because no AI company, no company can store the entirety of the internet in a cache. That's why they keep going out to the web to go fetch these articles. That's what keeps driving the bot traffic up. Now, I'll tell you the second interesting data point, which is not obvious, right? One of the things that we do is we track, we can see the referrer, where they're coming from. So are they coming from Anthropic? Are they coming from Gemini.google.com? Are they coming from OpenAI.com? Are they coming from Perplexity, for example? And we did an analysis of these 4 platforms. How many times, in the rare cases that a user clicked through on a link from one of these platforms, how many times did they end up with a 404, a article not found? Which means what? The link was dead, the link didn't exist, or it was hallucinated, right? It turns out that there is a direct correlation between how often the AI platforms send out bots for retrieval and how many 404s the users get. And it turned out that Anthropic, I think this is data from the Q2 report, I believe. Anthropic, up until that point, was not connecting Cloud Web to the internet on purpose, right? Or Cloud to the internet on purpose. Believe it or not, anytime someone clicked a link from Anthropic to go land to a site, 33% of the time it ended up with a 404. Imagine that if you tried to do a Google search where 1 in 3 links was broken, and that dropped dramatically in Q2. Why? Because Anthropic connected Claude to the internet. They started sending out the bots more often. Their cache times went, I think, from 45 days to, I think, 1 or 2 days, right? And suddenly the 404 errors went down, right? And we saw this across the platforms. The lowest error rate of any of the AI, I believe, applications, 404 rate, was Perplexity, which, as we know, they don't tend to follow any of the robots.txt rules. They will use, hidden user agents to go access the content. And because of that, their indexes seem to be the most up to date. But that was an interesting insight that shows like how important it is that these bots have continued access to the web. It's not just I got the content, now I'm just going to cache it forever. That actually creates a worse user experience down the road for them.
Very interesting. Before I quickly open it up, I have one question building on what you just said. Now, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of a publisher today, whether it's an independent media company like Fountain Fuel or a large institution, where and how do you begin rethinking the business model, as it were?
That is a fantastic question, and one that, in fact, we have like, Harsha's going to laugh when I say this. It's not a conversation every media company is ready for. Even in the US, we have very closed door, high level conversations. We can usually feel out the publishers who are thinking about this, right? Because in order to understand where this is going, you have to come up to speed very quickly with where the world is now, right? You need to understand the rise in RAG traffic. You need to understand, the failings of cybersecurity in the long run, right? That it's not a winning solution. And only then can you look at, well, how do you reshape the business for what the new physics, the new economics of the internet, right? With this new audience. I'll give you one piece of anecdotal evidence that we start with. There is enough liquidity in the Tolbit network that we've actually already started seeing what kind of content starts commanding a premium. That's actually very interesting, right? Because it's not what you would expect. And I'll give you an example. We actually know that the price that a piece of content can command is actually based on 4 things, right? The first is, and I think Indraji, when we got tea in Bombay, in Mumbai, we were talking about this.
Yeah.
The first is freshness, right? How is this breaking news? Or is this a 2-year-old article or even a week-old article, right? Fresh things always command a premium. The second is brand name, right? There is always a premium on the brand name, right? A piece of content from a marquee publisher, it establishes user trust. It will always, all things being equal, even if another publisher has the same content, it will command a premium simply because of the name. The third is how easy is it to get to the article? Is it paywalled or not? One of the first things that happens when an AI company comes to Tolbit is first they say, we'll start with paywalled content, right? There's higher liability they take on. It's more difficult to scrape. So they first say, give us the paywalled content first. That commands a premium. The last thing, though, and this is, I think, where it gets really unique, and I think this is in the long run going to be the most important, is how unique is that data, right? And when I say unique, what I mean is how replaceable is that data, right? Because, and I'll give you a real example of how every publisher, I think, has, or a lot of publishers, I should say a lot of publishers have optimized for in the SEO world, and how it actively hurts them in this new world. You can make a safe bet that that 150 million people in the US search for Donald Trump every day, right? Safe bet. It's a safe keyword, right? And so if you're a newsroom and you have limited resources and you have to write some articles a day, you will probably write 3 or 4 articles about Trump a day because 150 million people are going to look at it, right? Or are searching for it, right? However, every other publisher is making the same calculation, right? Every publisher is writing 3 to 4 articles about Trump. Here it's Trump, there it might be Modi. I'm not sure, right? But you get the idea, right? There are some certain keywords, and you're going to allocate resources against those keywords because you want to make sure you can get traffic, right? That worked fine for SEO, perhaps, but it actually actively hurts publishers in this new economy. Because if every publisher writes the same 3 or 4 articles about Trump every day, same 3 or 4 headlines about the same things that he said, or tweets that he made that day, or whatever he decided to do, um, does when an AI company decides to ground on someone asked a question inevitably about Trump, and they decide to ground on those articles, do they need 10 articles that say the same thing? They probably don't. In fact, maybe you could do with 5. Maybe you could do with 4. And maybe you just pay for one of the big brands and then two smaller brands, right? And that is good enough for an answer. So the tactics that some publishers that employ for SEO actually hurts them in this new world. And in fact, what would have got right more leverage is something that no publisher had written, right? That you cannot easily replace it with. Now, it might be a niche query. It might be that not everyone is looking for that, right? Particular, review about a coffee maker or about a coffee bean, right? For example, but the person who wanted to know, you had the most authoritative article on that, and the AI company had no choice but to pay you for that, right? So that's sort of, the interesting sort of new sort of economics that we see emerging here.
Very, very interesting. This is music to our ears as well, because I think clearly we're moving to a world where less is more, and differentiation and authority that you spoke about are going to be fundamental drivers. Let's see how it plays out, however. But I'm guessing there are publishers who are holding on to that old legacy way of thinking as well. I'm guessing you encounter quite a few of those as well in your
Of course.
in your work. So with that, and that's a terrific context setting session. I would love to have more people jump in. Just raise your hand, use the icon to just cue that you'd like to come in and ask a question. Ramnath will figure out a way to unmute. I think Supriyo, you want to go first? Swaroop has put up his hand as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
very.
Supriyo, go first, then we'll come to Swaroop.
Thanks,
Go ahead.
Toshit. Fascinating inputs. I actually had the privilege of speaking with Harsha about, what was it, 6 months back? And I think 6 months is like a decade in your business. So it was a good refresher course. The core of it remains the same. So what I'm with my background is I worked for The Economist for about 10 years, Toshit. And so obviously I have a legacy hat always on. But when you mention those 4 points that causes a premium, all that plays into publishers who have legacy, right? Now, when I think about it, all those, not all those, at least the breed that I come from, are first subscription and then ads, right? Now, the fact is that this balance of what was Google earlier, now AI earlier, versus subscriptions has always been what we have been playing at in these companies. The interesting thing that I would like to know from you is that this seems perfect, what your solution is. I don't see the downsides. Obviously, you're not going to tell me the downsides, but why isn't everybody signed on? So that was the first question. And I'm looking at it from the economist hat. I said, this is a no-brainer, man. I'm just trying to think, is this some way going to affect my subscription business? When I have 1 million paying subscribers who pay me, I don't know what it is now, 150 odd, and it's not a very large subscription business. The WSJ is 4 million right now. And so is there a fear that's going to affect my subscription business? And the pennies or cents that you're offering for content is not going to make up for that 150, $160 person? What's holding it back?
Great question. Thank you for the question. So I'm glad that you had a chance to meet Harsha as well. And it seems like you were quick on the uptake there. There's a couple different layers to that question. The first one I'm going to probably touch on is, and forgive me, you might have to repeat some of the points because I will definitely forget it. But one of those actually echoes the last thing with which Indrajit has also said, which is, we encounter, say, legacy media companies all the time, right? Or we would say that everyone's trying to make this with this transition, right? I don't think that any through that lens, I think legacy is a little bit of an unfair word because everyone's trying to go through this together right now, right? This disruption. And there are a few of them who are sort of, torchbearers who are saying that, hey, we're going to figure it out first, or we're going to lean into figuring this out. But on the topic of why hasn't everyone signed up, I think it was in the US, right? One of the things that we had to sort of overcome and we had to convince publishers of was that some of them were trying to negotiate deals with a large AI company, right? And so they first wanted to see how successful they might be, right, at, say, getting a deal with a large one of our large model training companies before they decide to commit anything, right? And I think the longer that took and the more those deals dried up and, those deals actually weren't happening. And then even in the industry, everyone's friends with each other. Some of them who did sign that deal, there ended up being some sort of seller's remorse even, right, on the publisher's end, as they realized, what they thought they were signing up for versus how their content ended up getting used, right? I think that's when they realized that this was, and they also understood what the future of monetization potential with RAG is as they saw that data come in, right? Because in the beginning, is it new? Is it a fad? Is it going to change architecture? No one knew, right? In 2020, I can tell you the inflection point happened and we felt it happen in about Q1 of 2025. That's when we didn't go into any meeting anymore and no one questioned whether RAG monetization was the future. No one questioned whether this was a growing market, right? And I do think the sort of numbers also speak for themselves. I think at this point we have over 7,000 publishers on the platform. It has hockey sticked a little bit, knock on wood. So we're also looking at a few other verticals now as well, right? Because if you also think of a little bit of my background, I didn't come from publishing, to be honest, right? And I didn't come from AI either, right? I was actually at a point of sale company, a restaurant point of sale company, and I was running R&D for their ads business. So I was showing ads on their, they had the equivalent of Zomato and all that stuff, right? So we had our online ordering applications and websites, and I was showing ads there. And I started asking, well, wait, before starting TollBit, I asked myself, well, if AI one day orders food for me or books a table for me, who do I show my ads to, right? And back then in 2023, right, I don't think any e-commerce platform, and certainly my previous employer, they had not understood this was their problem. If you look at all the buzzwords regarding agentic commerce that started happening in Q3, Q4, right, of last year, the Walmarts of the world, the Etsy's of the world, the eBay's of the world, they know this is their problem now. And in fact, from a structural perspective, they're facing the same problems publishers are facing, right? Which shows how widespread this problem is, right? They're spending more to try to secure their data, right? Their content is data, right? And it's a losing battle. The more they're blocking them, the more the bots are just finding other ways to get access to it. And even they are getting disintermediated from their visitors, right? And they see this as an inevitable outcome now. So it just shows the scope of how big the problem is. And the last thing I'll also say is, you said one interesting thing, that this is tilted in the favor of legacy media companies, right? And I'll actually push back a little on that. There's a publisher on TollBit. You wouldn't even call them a publisher. It's a startup, right? And what they do is they take data, which is hard for LLMs to understand, AI to understand, PDFs, hard to parse, 10Q, 10K reports, spreadsheets, government data, right? Data sets, which AI is not good at parsing, on the fly. And they turn those using AI into textual narratives. If you go to their site, you will not see a single article. You cannot see it. You cannot access it. You have to sign up for their API. And it starts fitting some of that formula, right? It's very unique content. It's paywalled. In fact, you cannot get access to it at all, right? Without signing up for their API. They command one of the highest premiums, and their math is simple. If they can write a story using AI for a penny, even if one of those even if those articles were accessed for 2 pennies, right, by just once, they have turned a profit, right? So it's a different way of, and I think there are some startups who are actually trying to take advantage of this new formula now as well.
Fair
Sorry,
enough.
I know I've been speaking for a while,
No,
but I
fair
hope that
enough.
addresses some of.
Yeah, fair enough. I was just trying to provoke you. Don't worry. I think the problem is problem is well known and established, and I'm glad someone is trying to do something about it. Very interesting. Lots of others have questions.
Yes,
Ajay is got his
Yeah,
yes,
hand raised. He's getting
yes.
tired.
thank you.
Please.
Ajay, we've got a lot of questions on chat. I'll take one at a time. Ajay, do you want to go first? You'll have to just unmute yourself and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I've pretty much abandoned the media business, as you know, and we sell FMCG, and we've kind of been doing that for quite a few years. And I remember starting my life in Express, then moving to TV, where we were part of the network 18 team and TV. At that time, TV looked like the next big thing. Then the internet happened, and then the internet. But all of these actually, models disrupted the previous guys. So the print guys did not, come into television. Neither the television guys went into digital. My sense is a new wave of publishers also. I mean, if you're talking about publishing news and opinion and those kind of content will come, which is basically completely different as far as cost base is concerned when it comes to the generalist models. So I think a lot of the lamenting will happen from the legacy players who are getting disrupted. We got disrupted by even in entertainment. If you remember, Google, YouTube took all our content, built a media business on YouTube, and then obviously became the largest platform in the country, right? So I think the death knell for existing players with existing models is, I mean, it's a fairly certain kind of thing, right? As far as generalist is concerned. So either you do extremely specialist stuff, which is of value to someone like, for example, a Lex Legis or a legal guy or founding fuel or somebody who actually brings in something specific to the table, which is not possible or not easy in the lazy editor model of the previous era survives, or the extremely high value content creators, which is when the video side, whether it's the Netflixes or the Amazons of the world, and people who are actually creating for them, right? Everything that was in the middle, which was relative, we all knew there was fairly shallow business models and shallow content models. I think they're all going to go. I don't know whether Tolbit or what. Sorry, it's called Tolbit, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any of these gatekeeping models will obviously help, kind of decelerate the pace of demise of this, right? But my sense is it's a new model will come where people will actually supply. Like, if you look at TikTok and Instagram and whatever else, a new generation of entertainment content creators came from nowhere, which was possibly not even thought of in the era of television and even internet earlier, right? So a lot of disintermediation is happening, and I have a feeling that a lot of new people will come and do stuff. And my sense is that the media business monetization problem continues, whether AI is there or not. I think it has been on a downhill, especially in the non-entertainment side, for a long time. So I actually want to provoke a question about that. Like, how do you think all of this will work in the context of a larger, slippery slope that over the whole of this business of publishing and news plus and even opinion has gone? So even so that even, I mean, I founded an entertainment business after that, right? The digital media entertainment business, which was a content company. I barely hold any stake anymore because I really don't see too much future, even in the model of people supplying content or becoming producers to the large giants, right? Because you don't barely get any of that upside. So sorry.
No, that's fine. Toshit, do you want to respond quickly? Because we've got lots of
Yeah,
other questions.
yeah. I think you're 100% right? We're not going into any of these meetings, right? And then we're not making any promises that overnight things are going to be cheery here, right? I think the industry is in for a disruption, right? We're not saying that the way the cost structures, the way the org is set up, the amount of maybe even employees that they have, right, is going to be, things are going to go through a lot of changes in the next few years, right? And we're not going to we might not make any of that. We might not save it from that, right? The disruption is here. It's going to happen. And I think it goes to kind of like Mr. Supriyo's question previously, right? There will be new players, right? There are publishers emerging. They don't look like publishers. You would not even call them publishers, but they're writing only for AI to read, right? It's AI written content and it's only made for other AI bots to read, right? Because they understand that this is actually the biggest reader. And yes, and I think you're right. Like anyone who has direct relationships, so the Instagrams, TikToks, Netflixes, HBOs, where you have to go and watch, right? They will be okay, right? For now, at least. But anyone is caught in that middle, right? I do think that there is a place for publishers, right? As sort of the they have they have sustained print. They have sustained, right? Like when we went from telling stories orally to actually writing things down, right? And then even the printing press happened, right? So you've survived print, you've survived radio, TV, internet, social apps, right? This is the next wave of the disruption. We're not saying the biggest publishers today are going to be the biggest publishers tomorrow. We're not saying that the way you've organized your orgs in the past is going to be what's going to be the same tomorrow. But we also don't believe that as a role that you play in society, it's going to disappear, right? It might look very different though in that future, right? Both in terms of what you're producing and who you're producing it for.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that. I'll come to Charles. Do you want to kind of come in, unmute yourself, and ask the question that you've asked about disruption and where the game is moving? Charles, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, my
Good.
net is hi, Toshit.
Hey.
So my net is a little slow. I'll just
No worries.
where I was. Can you guys? Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
My net is a
Yes.
little low. So, Toshit, I was listening into you, and one of the questions that was playing on my mind is that, as you are looking at as you're talking to all of these players, are there incumbents that can actually see the writing on the wall? Are you coming across those kind of players, and what is it that they're doing? Are there incumbents that you're not writing off? And in much the same way, are there startups that you're seeing who are doing some really innovative stuff and have not surfaced yet, who have not?
Yeah. Great question. There are 100% are incumbents who I don't think we can talk about all the things, at least not in a public forum that they're doing.
I think we could
But
take this as we could take this as IG said, there's an adda, so please be assured that most of it.
yeah, but I do think there are definitely. So, for example, some of the folks that come to mind are People Inc., formerly Dotdash Meredith, right? They are heavily leaning to the space. They're experimenting with a few things with us as well that are completely, next gen. As we look at Time Magazine, right, is completely on the forefront. They've gone all in on this, and whenever we have something new, Time is usually the first person we go to, and we say, "Hey, you want to try this thing?" And usually they say yes, right? And some of those things are a little bit crazy, right? And they are down for experimenting. We have just started some engagements with, say, Axel Springer, right? Who is, they were the first to do the deal with OpenAI, right? They want to see that, that there is what is the new economic model of the future, right? And they are deep into experimentation to figure out what that future could look like, what the content forms could look like, who those audiences are, how that delivery might happen. But there are 100% a few publishers. Hearst is another great one. The people that we go to when we say that when we have something new, we have a roster of 5 or 6 publishers we go to first because they will understand exactly what it is that we're showing them.
Just to add to that question, is there something about their DNA that allows them to go the way they are?
That's an interesting question. So obviously I'm an outsider. I don't work at these organizations, but I do think from the one thing that they all share, at least from an outside perspective that I can say, is when we first started pitching TollBit, right, to people, say late 2023, early 2024, we realized that this is not something we could pitch to a product manager at a media organization, right? This is you have to go to the executives and you have to convince them, right, that this is a directional shift for a media business, right, to think about. And I think the thing that is shared by all of these companies is that the top level executives are very much bought in to where this is going. So when we get on a call with any of these, media companies, it is the executives who get on the call, right? They're the ones who see what we're showing them, and then they say, yes, go, this is who you need to talk to, go try it out, right? And they sort of like carve that sort of path. It comes from top down, and they say, go experiment, this is the person, I'm clearing the path for you. So that is the one thing I think they all do share. It's top down leadership that says, you have to figure this out. This is existential.
Toshit, I'm going to kind of move to I know Charles had asked a question about incumbents, but I want to focus because there's some pointed questions on how small publishers and niche publishers ought to look at competing. And I think Anant has asked a question, and I'll come to Anuradha as well. She can unmute herself in the meantime. Arun his signal is poor, so I'm going to take the initiative to read out what he's saying. Should we simply be thinking about small publishers and niche publishers who actually may have a much higher reach with AI than otherwise? And how do we expect copyright laws to change? And
So
I think
this is
Anuradha has asked a question as well, which we can pick up after this and then move on. Yeah. go ahead.
amazing. So to Mr. Arun's question about small publishers and niche publishers, so knowing that the net amount of content consumption that it, will increase, for example, right? I think that there's going to be a premium demanded for that unique sort of long tail content. The trick and the thing that we keep working on right now is how do you make that discoverable, for example, right? How do you make sure that you can actually that when someone is looking for, hey, what is the best coffee bean that comes from South India, for example, right? We can actually surface the right authoritative publishers that will have differentiated content on this. So there's a couple of things that we haven't launched yet that we're working on that also helps there. How do you surface the unique content? How do you surface content that might not have been picked up by Google, for example, right? In order to find that. And in terms of how do you expect copyright laws to change, so I'll put a disclaimer on this and say that I'm obviously not a lawyer, but we are actually less fixated on copyright laws, right? And actually, one of the things that we think about a lot, right, especially in many, closed door conversations with regulators, lawmakers, if you wanted to effectively, in our opinion, if you wanted to effectively regulate this, right, instead of treating this as a copyright law change, right, or an IP law change, which is highly complex, it will relitigate a lot of copyright cases and open a can of worms. It will, copyright in every jurisdiction is slightly different, right? Especially when, the ones that have sort of early come out to what it applies to AI and training. Instead, what we say is, if you wanted to make the smallest regulatory change that would solve this problem, right, at a foundational level, and it sort of it's piggybacks on the theme of the State of the Bots report. It should be illegal to send out a bot that mimics a human. We're in for a very hard time for as long as that is allowed, right? All of this stems from the fact that when you choose to block a bot, they can instantly make it look like a human visitor, and you will never be able to know. And that unfairly puts the cost on publishers and website owners and e-commerce companies, right? Anyone with data on the internet. The smallest regulatory change can happen is that it needs to become illegal to make a bot mimic a human. Bots need to correctly identify themselves. They need to correctly identify their intention, and there should be penalties for misrepresenting a bot as a human. If that simple thing is done, there are people like us to make that market on the other side, right? And that is something that can scale across all jurisdictions, right? And it doesn't involve relitigating copyright across the board.
Very interesting. Very interesting. This is the whole concept of faceless browsers is a reality that I think we're coming face to face with. Anuradha, do you want to go next? I think you had a specific question on the other, the use of platforms like YouTube. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Actually, IG, I was hoping you would because I'm like in a slightly noisy place.
Okay.
But okay.
Okay. No, we can hear
Hi,
you.
Toshit.
Hi.
The work you guys are doing is directed primarily at publishers, big, small, medium, but people who have proprietary platforms. But in most countries now, not just in India, but we just saw all the layoffs that happened in the US, right, at the Washington Post, isn't it? A lot of journalists are doing independent work, right? And are using platforms that are freely available to them to do this work, whether it's Substack, whether it's YouTube. What can they do at this point of what is happening to their content on these kind of platforms at this point of time? What have you noticed? What have you seen? And is there anything that we can do to protect our content, or is that the price you pay if you're on a platform that's not owned by you?
Great question. Thank you, Ms. Anuradha. So I think one of the things that there was a lawsuit that got filed by Google against SERP API, I believe in Q4 of last year. And one of the things that it showed, both Reddit and Google actually, I believe, sued SERP API for scraping Reddit results and for scraping Google results, right, and reselling them. And I think one of the things that it showed, even in that Google blog post that they made about this, is that even at Google scale, with the amount of data that they collect and their understanding of traffic on the internet, they can't secure the content. What does it mean for the rest of us with the website, right? And so that was all. And I think the reason I say that is because when you ask about something like YouTube, right? I don't know that there is a good answer for I think we've seen there are demos I've seen on Twitter where you could, if you've been following the sort of blow up with OpenClaw, right, and personal assistants, there are demos that you could just send your OpenClaw agent to go download YouTube videos and you can just watch it on your device, right? And the barrier to entry of, you needed to be technical, you needed to set up a proxy, and you need special tools to download a YouTube video that's just gone, right? Because when you tell your agent to do it, it'll figure out, it'll go online, it'll do the research, it'll write the code, and it'll go download the video for you, right? You don't need to figure that out anymore. So I think all of these disruptions are happening faster than I think people realize. I think when it is on a platform like YouTube or Substack now, some of those, we do have conversations going with companies, say like Substack, right? For, how do you make it so that you might be able to monetize content? Because I think a lot of these platforms are also coming to the same conclusion that you do need a monetization solution. And this is what leads, to our partnerships that we have with, say, like Fastly or WordPress, right? Where they have now, based on the requests of their, writers or website owners have said, hey, you need to give me, a monetization solution as well. So I'm sorry, it's not going to be a perfect answer, but yeah, I do think that the platforms have a slightly different problem. And I think they're coming around to the fact that you do need a way to have that machine monetization.
Yeah, I think that leads us directly to a question that, thanks, Anurag, to a question that Deepak Ajwani, I think, has been patiently waiting to ask. Deepak, do you want to unmute and go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Ajay. Hi, Toshit. I worked for a website for a business publication in India, Economic Times, newspaper's website. Clearly having a mechanism for payment work because these LLMs are way too powerful, and there are a handful, 3 or 4, right? Gemini included, which right now have the ability to pay.
Yes, it's a fantastic question. It goes back to when we started, I'm thinking of like the best way to sort of approach this question. When we started TollBit, there was sorry, there's a lot of words in my head. I'm trying to figure out where to actually start the stream of thought. So when we started, right, we started on this and we thought about this quite a bit, right? where we said that how confident are we that the future is not three companies, right? And I do believe it is in a lot of the AI companies' favors, right? When they come to the negotiating table, they're going to tell you that they have the upper hand here, right? Or they're going to try to seem like they have the upper hand. It will get them to get a better, or it'll try to, they're going to try to force you to give them a better price in the content, for example, right? If you think that they have already scraped the content and it's like, for example, how there's publishers on TollBit that have deals with AI platforms. They flow through us and we see the data, right? And the publishers thought that this was a deal for training, and it actually turned out it was a deal for RAG because the same articles get scraped tens of thousands of times a day, right? And the data, I think they think about if they had known this, maybe they would have structured or negotiated the deal differently, right? So I think out of the gate, the data helps everyone. And I do think that this sort of divide and conquer strategy only helps the AI companies, right? By maybe taking one or two of the biggest names in every geo, right? So that, they get the content they need, and then there can't be consensus, say, in a market, right? Are they doing this or not? I don't know, right? But they're selected, for sure, they're selectively doing deals in the markets, right? Like you said, with some of the marquee names. Now, to your other, I think, sort of subtle question, which I think is powerful, right? How do you give publishers the upper hand, right? And I want to focus on that for a second, because when we started, right, we made a very conscious decision. And we say this to every publisher, and sometimes publishers don't sign up because of this. They come around months later. We tell them we're not a cybersecurity company. We're not in the cybersecurity business because we don't believe in it in the long term, right? Yes, we're not telling you to rip out your cybersecurity vendor, but if you want cybersecurity, I'll refer you to 12 companies at 12 price points, right? But we're not going to do that ourselves, right? Our whole mission, right? We accepted from the start the content will get scraped. We assumed from the start, our starting assumption was that you cannot secure the content, right? Every cybersecurity company will come to you right now and say, hey, we're going to help protect your content because they want your business, right? We did not start with that premise. We assumed that the content will get scraped. Our whole mission, right? If you were to sum it up in sort of, one statement, how do you create leverage without scarcity? And what I mean by that is I think everyone got fixated on the scarcity piece, right? That was the knee-jerk reaction. Everyone wants my content. Everyone's scraping it. There's a ton of AI traffic or bot traffic suddenly coming from certain IP addresses, right? From different geos. I need to block them. I need to create scarcity, because if I create scarcity, then I can go and have the upper hand in negotiation, right? Our ethos, our mission is to find new business models where the core assumption is the content is going to get scraped. Maybe you cannot even protect it. But given that, how do you use the sort of structural advantage that publishers have to their advantage and create leverage so that you can create a product and offering that AI companies are willing to pay for? Because if you open we have experience doing this. If you try to go knock on the door and start the conversation with licensing, it doesn't go very far. So there are actually a lot of problems AI companies have, right? But that could be fixed with the cooperation of a website owner, right? Because turns out everyone's on different tech stacks, and scraping is still, it's possible, but it's unreliable. And that 4 to 64-second window gives us opportunity to create a more reliable way to get access to this data, right? So I could talk for hours about this. We're not going to decide that, but Mr. Deepak, I think rest assured, I think the question is, right, like, how do you create leverage without scarcity? That's the avenue we pursue.
Very interesting, Toshit. Thanks so much for that. I know there are a few people patiently waiting. I'll come to you. Srinath, Swaroop had raised his hand right at the beginning. There's Vivek and a few others as well. But I thought this would be a good time to bring in someone who's certainly not a traditional publisher, but Akhilesh, you might want to just quickly introduce yourself and ask your question, because it cuts to a slightly different way of looking at the phenomena. Are you there?
Yes. Thank you, Indrajit.
Yes.
Thank you for a fantastic conversation. I am parked now, so don't worry about the seatbelt. But Toshit, I am one of those startups that you mentioned effectively who scrapes all the 10 key 10 Qs in the Indian context and builds in a lot of alternate data and can publish at penny a piece for AI to consume. One of the ways that we are thinking of monetizing is connectors into LLMs, which are paid for. And what you opened up as an idea is why even bother with a connector at an LLM, and why not just monetize? Let the LLM pay you for the sort of penny or a couple of penny prices, etc. How does one think of this trade-off? I know that if I have to sell my connector, that's a different type of a GTM. And this is a very different type of a GTM that you are promising, in a sense that the clouds of the world take my content everywhere. How should one think about this?
Good question. So Mr. Akhilesh, I'm not, I may have misspoke. I don't think that you should abandon the connector concept, right? Because if you do have, and I agree, it's a little bit of a different go-to-market. If you have like one of the other startups that I was talking about, right? They have to have a different go-to-market where they have data that's unique. It's alternate data. They have created these sort of narratives for AI companies. Their go-to-market, they have to find financial institutions, for example, who are deploying AI agents and need access to this information, right? What is the most efficient way to get access to this information? It might be a SaaS, every month they pay, or on a per article basis they pay, and it's going to be, the connector component is simply an implementation detail, right? Is it an API? Is it an MCP server? Whatever, right? That just becomes an implementation detail at the end. I think a lot of what the focus when I said that, right, was it was more about a zero shot access, if you will, right? So it's different if I'm a finance company, I've signed a deal with you and I'm getting access to your connector and you're going to bill me on some basis. But how in the moment when I have a query, I might never have heard of your service. How do I get access to that in real time, right? Which is the sort of mechanic that I think publishers fall into, which is I need access to this article. I need to scrape this thing that's behind a paywall. Give me a price. Let's negotiate programmatically on the price because we might not have a deal in place yet. So I think that's a little subtle difference.
Got it. So, Toshit, in the interest of time, we're going to speed up a bit. Srinath, you've asked some 3 or 4 questions. Will you pick one for this, the most important one to your mind?
Yeah, I'll pick one. Hi, Toshit.
Okay.
Toshit, just on the state of the industry, one of the emerging trends is you could write poison content about some brand and get that published and damage the reputation of the brand. We will see this happen in some time for sure, because it's happened in every other thing, like TripAdvisor and so on. How do you see this playing out, and what role do platforms like yours play a role, or would someone else come in and help with this? What was going to happen?
Sorry, to clarify, are you trying to poison the content, or you're trying to prevent the poisoning of content?
Prevent, right? Because I foresee it will happen. So how would you, because LLMs are scraping such volumes of content that it's a matter of time that people write enough negative news about someone or some brand and surface that within LLM content.
Yeah. So it is an interesting topic, and it touches actually on if you've been following this new buzzword of GEO, generative engine optimization, or AI engine optimization, right? It touches on a little bit of those themes, right? Because I think the brands or groups, organizations, political parties, whatever it is, right? They want to make sure that they are presented in a certain way. And they're spending a lot of money to try to figure out how to make sure that their brand is correctly presented, right? And I think just as much as there's poisoning of the or might be poisoning of the content, I think a lot of focus right now is actually on the alternative, right? Which is is there an arbitrage where I can get it to promote me over my competitors, or can I get it to speak a certain way about my service, which might be subpar, but it's going to promote it as the gold standard, for example, right? Some of the tactics that we've seen are, you can pay to spin up fake Reddit threads that talk about your product, right, in a positive light. You can create synthetic articles that talk about your product on your site, for example, right? And it's kind of like poisoning, but in the opposite way. It's poisoning it in a good way, right? And I think what we're seeing is the platforms even, it's like, in the early days of SEO, or early days of Google, when you could write shovel 1,000 times and Google thought you knew a lot about shovels, it's basically the equivalent of that for AI, right? And every quarter, what we see is that the platforms keep plugging the little hacks that the geo companies are employing, right? And I do think that those inadvertently, those safeguard or the things that they're doing to stop the positive poisoning, right, or the arbitrage that people have, I hope will actually also net out to stop the poisoning of sort of negative articles as well, because it's not about just one article, right? You have to remember that even if that brand wanted to say something good or bad about a different brand, they're one of 12 citations. There's 11 other citations that they probably can't influence, right? Which are you all, publishers.
Terrific. No, this is getting very interesting. Swaroop, do you still have that question since you put up your hand right at the beginning?
Yeah.
Do you want to go next?
One comment and one question. First of all, The Economist did sign up, but with Notebook LLM, and there was a lot of seller's remorse. The second question that I have is, what does Toshit think of the strategy that some of these large legacy publishers, stroke business intelligence companies have of moving away from text towards proprietary data sets, primarily index building and survey collections, cost of living and so on and so forth, trying to get a kind of higher margins from clients who are willing to pay them. I know it's a bit off center, but it's related to the conversation we're having. So we kind of transform into a proprietary data insights company away from legacy publishers for all the reasons that you just listed. That's one. And we see these data marketplaces gaining prominence and provenance. You can think of many of them. I don't need to name them. What do you think their future is? Do you think they will still dominate? They have all kinds of bells and whistles, as you know. They have their own proprietary model builders and forecast providers and so on and so forth. So this is going to go on for a while.
That's the exact kind of experimentation that some of those, when we have our list of 5 or 6 publishers we go to first to try new things. I think this is the exact kind of like top down. You have to disrupt. They're all trying to disrupt themselves, right? They're saying that, we've sort of seen this world. We've accepted that there is a zero-click world coming, that the referrals are going down. People will not be coming for commoditized content. How do I improve my margins? They have teams, whether it's less of the time, it's the entire org participating in it, but they have dedicated resources internally that are trying to figure out, how do I make data more accessible? How do I surface that unique data? How do I create higher margin content, and then run experiments to figure out which kind of form factor of that content is, say, higher margin? So I do think it's the same spirit of experimentation that I think the big publishers that are trying to disrupt themselves are following top down.
Got it. I can't seem to see Rahul Fernandez. He may have moved on, but if he is, you could go next. If not, Dinesh, do you want to jump in? You had a question.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Toshit. Great. It's wonderful. This is like a really disruption at the next level itself. But what I really want to know is more of a political question, because I come from that perspective. See, ultimately, you've always seen that whenever something seems to become more democratized and more sort of available to more and more people, you've seen this pushback from big tech, right? And some countries have regulated, like Australia did with Google and all of that, in favor of publishers. But do you foresee a sort of conflict emerging? Once I imagine the costs of scraping would significantly go up if everybody was to put up a gate, right? And so, do you see at some point of time big techs sort of pushing back? And at what point does it become a political conversation rather than just a business conversation?
It is it's a very interesting question, because when we sort of, and I'll tell you this, the reason you're giving me a little bit of a flashback, because when we first started Tolbit, right, one of the thought experiments we played out was that, take this to its logical limit. Suppose we don't fix this problem, right? Traffic to websites dies. There is no sort of like economic model to sustain, what is the biggest visitor on the internet anymore, the AI visitors. People will not, and even if even if you made some deals, the old unit economics don't hold up anymore, right? Your CDN is charging you on some basis about underlying assumptions about how much money they think you're making off of every visitor as well, right? And even if you sign a deal with a large AI company, right, and they start sending 1 million bots a day to your site, those unit economics might not even hold, the egress costs might not hold up anymore, right? So for all of those reasons, as we played out that thought experiment, we said there is no world that we can, at least we hope there is no world in which publishing dies, right? Because if we don't solve this problem, what happens is there's no incentive to create or share any content, period, right? There's no incentive. You can't monetize it. What's the goal, right? Why would you ever put out anything anymore, right? And if that's the case, then democracy itself is at stake, right? And before it gets to that point, right, every government needs to evaluate, right, how much that democracy, that government, right, is actually worth to them, right? Against all the influence that big tech has and how much lobbying they'll have. And we can debate about which countries are most liable to being influenced by them in this climate right now. But if this is a problem that isn't solved, governments themselves, democracies themselves are at risk, right? And we sort of took this bet that before it gets to that point, someone, right, you need one jurisdiction, right, to start to actually figure out how to regulate this thing, right? Which is why, I think Mr. Arun had this question, or someone that we were talking about earlier, where we said that the smallest regulation you can have, you can't go down the copyright route, right? They tried that in 2024 and early 2025, right? Where they said, you have to tell us what you train on. And every big tech company said, no, absolutely not. We'll never do that, right? And it sort of died, right? Never went anywhere. Now, you have to look at, what is the smallest thing everyone could get behind? It's probably to say that bots, for all sorts of, there's ethical reasons, then there's economic reasons and practical reasons. Bots cannot pretend to be human, right? And I'll give you a slightly another example. Since you're asking about this, I'm gonna stretch this even more, right? Today we talk about Perplexity and Google, maybe, right, and OpenAI. There's a world, and what are we preparing for? If you've seen the demos that Tesla has, that Boston Dynamics has, right, of humanoid robots, right? Every single robot in the future is going to have a GPT-powered, internet-connected consciousness, if you will. They need access to the world's information. Are we expecting that they're just going to, you ask for the weather, they're going to go out and scrape the weather, right? This is what we mean by, I don't think we're understanding the magnitude of bot traffic that will happen on the internet. It will be, and our hope, I guess, Mr. Dinesh, is that 5 years from now, we look back and we were actually stunned that we ever debated that bots can just pretend to be humans when they go online, right? Because of the amount of bot traffic. And in fact, it will come to that point where you assume statistically any visitor on our site is a bot, period.
Right. Yeah, I was asking that question precisely because we are seeing a lot of, rollback of democracy. That's the reason why I asked that question. And you've seen even GDPR rules being diluted now after all these years. Thanks for that.
Terrific.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. If I may add, Dinesh and Toshit, the Digital News Publishers Association in India is working with the government, or I would say lobbying with the government, lobbying so that they can get at least some of the LLMs to listen in and behave, so to say, if I can use the word. Because obviously the publishers realize that if they don't talk to the government and don't get something done, then their future is in dire straits. So they're working both ways, trying to discuss with LLMs, get some money, and even coerce the government and figure out some way of government telling the LLMs that you can't do this. Because yeah, I mean, with information, to me, if the news publishers' websites do not make money or die, then a lot of information that the world needs
Yes.
and the democracy is at stake. So, in a way, publishers are trying to do both, negotiate
Yes.
this end and also talk to the government.
Thanks for that, Deepak. There is an important question there from one of the Swamis. I don't know which one. So one of you will have to unmute and ask your question about exactly what we're discussing, which is about collaboration among publishers. Will you unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah. So, hi,
Yeah.
I'm Swami
Hi.
here. I'm IG. So, Toshit, the question that I really have is some of the challenges that publishers are facing that I see in their subscription model is if the content is not unique, irrespective of your subscription model, I just go there and not subscribe, right? So, therefore, whatever is happening, it's a very small, minuscule revenue that I get out of this subscription, right? Unless until it's like Bloomberg originals or something like that, where there's unique content, I go and subscribe to that. So the real challenge, what I find is there a new model of collaboration that is needed rather than looking at it from the lens of, okay, what can I monetize with my content? Because finally, AI, if it's actually reinventing the model search, then there's a need for reinventing the way publishers collaborate with each other to monetize their content.
Swami, are you talking specifically about bundling?
Sorry?
Are you referring to bundling as a concept, or is your notion
I
only
really
divided?
don't.
Okay,
I
fair
really
enough.
don't know. I think the model
Let's
could be that
listen. Yeah.
there is a agentic AI in every publisher's website where I'm really asking about wellness. I don't need to really know about wellness only from my content, but I may need to know wellness about everybody else's content, and that's really what a ChatGPT
Curated.
or
Yeah.
the Anthropic or the Claude guys do, right? So
I'm with
therefore,
you.
the whole thing about
Sure.
monetizing then becomes very, very different.
Sure. Toshit.
Yes. You're 100% correct, right? Like it's a you know what I can say is that there's stuff that we're building right now. It's not public, but that looks at this from a very structural level, which is how do you I think AI has been so sort of disruptive. It has forced, we're in a world where publishers were, largely competitive with each other, right? To actually collaborate and think about get in a room together and talk about how do you structurally solve this problem. And I think it forces us to look at old sort of established practices of saying, well, I'm only going to cross-link within myself or my network of properties, and then look at it more holistically and say, well, look, that person, ultimately, we're not competing with each other. We're trying to stay alive against this guy, right? Because in a way, the AI companies have turned into the new publisher, right? They're the ones who have the direct relationships now, and they're taking 10 articles and they're munging it into one article, right? For a person an answer for a person to consume, right? And they don't care about the arbitrary distinction between your businesses.
Exactly. That's the point that I'm saying. So what does the consumer need? And therefore, publishers looking at it from the consumer lens and not the publisher's lens. I think that's the big change in thinking I'm talking about.
Yes. We're working on some stuff that, hopefully as a platform can make some of that easier, but it's 100% like in the right vein of, the line of questioning is correct.
Very interesting. We have time for one last question, and then I'll request Toshit to do one final reflection for us before we close. Vivek, do you want to go next? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Actually, my question feeds into Swami's question just now. I'm talking about original content. I'm talking about original content and the use of AI in generating what goes for original content. Let's put it in doubles these days and across media. And you see that particularly across X and with the use of Grok and the others. It's controversial, but how does it actually help publishers? Does it enhance their business model? Does it take away from their business model? And is there something for AI-generated content and originality that needs to be really assessed at this point in time?
It's a good question. There's, at least as a person who subscribes to and reads original, especially long form content at, publishers like, say The Atlantic, Wall Street Journal, or and a few others, right? Like, I certainly do hope that there is, original long form content. And I do think that there's always going to be an audience segment for that, right? What the unit economics of that look like over time, we might not be sure, but I do think that there's always going to be demand for that original content, right? And in terms of the controversy of using, say, AI to generate content, right? I think it comes down to how it is packaged, right? If the goal is to present an article to a user and pass it off as this was human written, hey, look, this is a long form article, it has an author name at the top, right? I do think that sort of the consumer might not like being fooled that it was an AI generated content, right? Because if they wanted the AI answer, they would have just gone to the AI platform and asked the question, right? I do think that when, and it goes back to, I think there was someone on the call earlier, but, the other startups that I'm thinking about, right? They're using AI to generate content, which it would have been prohibitively expensive for humans to ever create, right? You would never have been able to, in a cost-efficient manner, turn these, data sets from tables into articles and narratives that the models can ground on, right? It just would not have happened. And so when it is used to sort of solve a problem in a productive way, and we know that it's AI because there's no other way it could have been written, right? I think it takes some of that stigma out.
Got it. The sun is risen behind you, Toshit. So I think
Yeah,
it's a signal that we've come to the end of our time. I know we're overshot the time a wee bit, but let me just kind of request you for one final reflection. If you were to leave this room with one or two sharp takeaways for people building in publishing today, what would those be? Very crisply.
I think the one or two things are, let me say this. Having been in every conversation with every US publisher, holding their hand and going on this journey, it took them a long time to get to these same questions today. It took years, in fact, for them. If Harsha was here, he would tell you, it took years for them to get to this point. I think some of the questions, especially some of the insights from the call, I think show that you're sort of brought up to speed. I think the literature is out there, right? And I think like we're not debating is training the future or is RAG the future, right? These are things that it took a year for the US market, a year and a half for the US market to even get their sort of minds around, right? And I think the critical thinking about how do you adapt the content, right, to a new audience, right? Thinking about this as an audience problem. How do you deliver this content to this new audience? How do you write content for this new audience? And for an audience that is going to be probably far more numerous than the humans coming to your site. That's going to be, the way we see it as today. Like I have my print business and I also have this digital business, right? And there's different teams managing that and it's a different audience and it's different unit economics. You're probably going to have a third pillar, which is I have this agentic audience, this AI audience. What am I going to do to optimize my content for them?
Terrific. Thank you, Toshit, and thank you everyone for such a thoughtful and engaged conversation. We'll share a recording of this session once it's ready, and we'll continue to build on some of these themes in the weeks ahead through our Founding Fuel conversation series. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you, Toshit, again.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time.
Terrific.